This session is focused on the situation across the Middle East, from Lebanon really over to Iran. We at ECFR has just released a new report, Middle East New Battle Lines, which very much looks at the developing sense of a coalition between Saudi Arabia, Israel, the US administration and President Trump, focused on pushing back against widening Iranian influence on the ground. And I think certainly from our perspective, it raises real concerns that we are entering an even more dangerous phase in the Middle East. I think clearly the last 7 years have been horrific. And I think Bassma, more than anyone else, will be able to give testimony to that in terms of the situation in Syria. But I think as we move forward, there is an increased risk of interstate conflict. I think the linkages between the conflicts between Lebanon, Syria, Yemen are growing ever more acute and pronounced. And it's scary to say this, but we could yet see escalation in new and dangerous ways that does take us beyond what we've seen so far. So we're really delighted to be able to bring together a great panel of speakers representing different perspectives from the region. To my left I have Aziz Aluwaisheg, who is the Assistant Secretary General for the Political Affairs and Negotiations at the Gulf Cooperation Council. I think he's the most senior Saudi diplomat at the GCC. He's a long-serving diplomat with the GCC. He's been with the UN. He's served in government posts within Saudi Arabia, so I think he's perfectly placed to speak from the Saudi perspective. He obviously, well, not obviously, but you spend time with MBS. You know the Saudi system very well, so I think you'll bring great perspective there. We're also joined by Bassma Kodmani, who many of you will know. She's a member of our council. We're delighted to have her. She's Executive Director of the Arab Reform Initiative, but obviously I think known to many of us as a very prominent and eloquent voice amongst the Syrian opposition. She's been the spokesperson for the last few months, again, last year I think. No, on and off. But I think Bassma will bring a great perspective from Syria, where this is really playing out on the ground very devastatingly. We then have Hossein Mousavian, former member of the Iranian National Security Council. He was also a member of the Iranian negotiating team for the nuclear talks, so he can speak from the Iranian perspective. And then last but not least, we have Vaïsse, Director of Policy Planning with the French MFA. And I think it's very interesting, and we're very glad that Justin can be with us, because certainly from our perspective, we do see France as being one of the more activist countries within the EU, frankly perhaps the only country within the EU at the moment that is really stepping up politically and trying to address a lot of the issues that we see unfolding at the moment. We frame this as a conversation on the Saudi and Iran, but I suspect that we are going to go much wider, because I think the danger, in a sense, we've been so focused on that binary for so long, but what we see in the region today is a conflict that is expanding in multiple ways. And obviously the thing that is on a lot of people's minds at the moment is the risk of conflict between Iran and Israel. Abdel Aziz, I'm going to start with you. You helped me by 2 days ago writing a column saying that we need a new global coalition to counter Iran's malign activities, and you said the real problem with making that effective is the Europeans. So you have a good audience.
Thank you. There's another microphone. Is it working? Is this working? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Julien, for the introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me here. This is my first night here at the council, and I really I enjoyed eavesdropping all morning this afternoon on your discussions. I had no idea I was walking in on an insurrection against the United States and other powers to be. But it was enjoyable. I think I may have a slightly different focus in my presentation, but I found myself really in total agreement with Anthony Dworkin's comments on the previous session when he said that we need to preserve or restore a rules-based international order. And that's really the theme of my comments. That when I think sometimes about the key challenge in the Middle East, of course there are many. I think you can think about several issues, but the number one, I think, challenge in the Middle East is the weakened role of international law and the weakened role of the international institutions that are charged with enforcing. What do I mean by that? Let me just give you some examples, recent examples. The Assad regime in Syria has used chemical weapons against his own people many times, scores of times, according to various reports, and at least a dozen times by UN reports. For some of our partners in the Middle East, some of our neighbors, other than the Assad regime, Iran, for example, this is business as usual. There was not one word from Iran that this should stop, or that international condemnation or international accounting of those who are responsible should take place. And of course, as you know, the Russians have also vetoed any attempts at the UN to bring those responsible to account. So this is something that we thought, all of us thought, was sacrosanct. An agreement that goes back decades, that chemical weapons shall not be used, has been broken, not once, but many times. So that's one example. In Lebanon, many politicians, writers, journalists have been either assassinated or attacked, and none of them have been brought to justice. I think the only attempt has been made is in the case of Rafiq Hariri, and is even there, still the international court has not been able to issue a verdict. Almost every week, Iranian allied militias and proxies throughout the region wreak havoc. And for Iran, this is business as usual. The Houthi militias have so far launched over 100 ballistic missiles against Saudi civilian targets, and they boast about it, and thousands of shorter range missiles during the past 3 years. Some of our neighbors, especially Iran, but also Syria, take a laissez-faire approach towards terrorism. In fact, they fund it, they train terrorists, they provide them with weapons and explosives, and spread them all over the world. Take Hezbollah, for example, in Lebanon. I think has managed to create the best center of excellence for terrorism. Its alumni are all over the place, skilled and able, and have the motivation and the funding to carry out their acts. I could go on and on. There are many examples. And of course, some in the Middle East have argued that since the international institutions charged with maintaining international law and order are weak, then we should discard the international system altogether, and we should take the law into our own hands. And that's certainly the approach that Iran has had, and they say that the international system is rigged against smaller countries, and in particular is manipulated and controlled by Western powers, especially the United States. And therefore, they should not respect it. Of course, we disagree with that. And I would cite two examples where incomplete and not perfect examples where international coalitions actually worked. And one of them is the recent one of them a while back that's more applicable to the discussion at hand. One is that how Daesh was defeated in Iraq and Syria by putting together an international regime, several UN Security Council resolutions were put together, quite elaborate system, and then an international coalition of the willing was put together to fight Daesh, and I think we're very close to winning. There's a very successful example of using the international system to defeat terrorism. The other example goes back to the 70s, but I think it's relevant to the discussion today. The Helsinki Accords. They started by a simple restatement of internationally accepted principles that both sides agreed to, and took it from there, and I think the results was clear about 15 years later in the end of the Soviet regime. And I think we have between the GCC, not just Saudi, but between the GCC as a group and Iran, we have several or many issues. And we tried over the years, over the last 25 years or so, to engage with Iran, to address them. I personally participated in some of those missions. We invited Iranian leaders to the GCC and vice versa. There were several attempts, but none of them worked. And I think because we disagreed on how to resolve it, we didn't have a common basis. When we talked with our Iranian colleagues, they do not accept international book of rules to resolve those conflicts. And they said, we are brothers, we should be able to deal with them as brothers, Muslim brothers, to address them and, invent our own rules. But we failed because we couldn't reach a common understanding, and the only common understanding I think that exists is the international system. And we told our Iranian brothers, say, the latest attempt was in 2016. Latest attempt at dialogue was in 2016. There was an exchange of letters through the Emir of Kuwait with Iran. And we called on Iran to commit with us jointly, publicly, and clearly on 3 principles that should not be controversial. And they're all borrowed from the international rules. First one, that both sides, both us, both Iran and the GCC, should commit publicly to the UN Charter. Sounds easy, right? All of us are members of the UN. Especially articles related to state sovereignty, respect for international borders, and respect for the political independence of your neighbors, and their territorial integrity. Second, we also suggested that we both make commitments to refrain from inciting or exploiting sectarian differences. Third, that we should respect each other's political systems and should refrain from trying to change them by force. To us, these seem to be non-controversial, which should be easy to accept, and especially since we were calling on Iran to join us in making that declaration, make that commitment publicly, because everybody has to know within Iran and others that Iran is committed to those principles. Still, we are waiting for the answer for those proposals. So I believe if Iran is serious about its desire for dialogue, it has to commit in words and deeds to those principles. We shouldn't have to ask them to do it. How can Europe help? How much time do I have?
If you want, we can get back to the Europe.
Okay.
If you want, I'll open up the conversation and then we come back to Europe.
I just want to say a couple of words about the nuclear deal.
Okay, very quickly.
I think it was one example of ad hocery in the region. It abstracted from the real and present issues, the challenges that we had in the Middle East, and chose this one, chose nuclear proliferation. Important as it is, it's not the main issue, it's not the only issue. And these discussions we had with the Europeans, with the Americans, going back more than a decade ago, we told them about that. This is not really, we shouldn't start with this. Either you have a deal that addresses all the main issues, or start with the more present, the more immediate, because Iran's ability to obtain a nuclear weapon was years in the making. It wasn't something urgent. But I think they chose to negotiate a nuclear deal, which we think is insufficient, but also is defective.
On that, why don't we move on to our Iranian voice, if that's okay, and I'll come back to you. But Hossein, there seems to be a degree of consensus in the Middle East and in Europe and in the States that Iran is behind a lot of the destabilizing problems in the Middle East today. How do you see that? How does Iran see the situation in the Middle East? Is war with Israel pending? And the big question, I mean, one hears a lot from voices like yourself that what we need is a regional dialogue. That's the answer. What is Iran prepared to do to initiate that, to really kind of build the confidence that would actually make that something substantial?
Good evening. I also would like to appreciate ECFR for the invitation. Talking after Abdelaziz's statement is not easy, because he was so nice with Iran. However, his last suggestion, the statement was really good. I fully support. I believe this is the way to go. And if Europeans are going to jump in based on these 3 principles, I believe they would get Iran in a deal. However, I really don't know if Abdelaziz knows or not. A year ago, Oman and Kuwait raised these 3 points, exactly these 3 points with Iran. Official letter at the highest level was exchanged between Emir of Kuwait and Iran. Rouhani officially confirmed the three principles, and at the moment they were going to enter a serious negotiation, Saudi Arabia declined. However, international order is perfect, but again I come back to the last statement of Abdelaziz. The JCPOA is practically international decision. United Nations Security Council has approved. The IAEA, International Order with UN Security Council resolution, IAEA resolution, they have both approved, ratified. Iran has fully implied, and Saudi has done everything, to dismantle the deal. This is the way Saudis are respecting international rules, decisions, and orders from the Iranian perspective. Iran didn't choose Abdelaziz nuclear deal. EU3 chose it. Europe came to Iran first in 2003. During Ahmadinejad, Iran proposed a broad dialogue with P5+1, EU3+3. Europe and the US declined. They said only nuclear. We are not going to discuss with you the broader package on the regional issues. Okay, this is just to clarify what Abdelaziz said. However, the Iranian perception from regional threats comes of 40 years of practical experience they have as Islamic Republic of Iran. First is continuous the US regime change policy Iran has been facing from the day one of revolution to bring down Iranian system. And now President Trump is accelerating there. Therefore, this is a first big threat perceptions. Iranian practically they have been faced for 40 years. This is not second. Second is war against Iran, which an Arab neighbor invaded Iran. Saudi, GCC, they supported the invasion of Iran. This is perhaps the way Abdelaziz wants to respect the UN Charter, to invade aggression against Iran, to support, to pay $40–50 billion to Saddam. And million Iranians, they were killed or injured. The third experience, practical experience, again I come back to Abdelaziz international order and rule, was the use of chemical weapons against Iranian. 100,000 Iranians, they were killed or injured. Europe, US, Saudis, all they supported the use of chemical weapon against Iran. And no other nation in this planet is more victim of chemical weapon than Iranians. No other. And you cannot see one single word during the last 40 years from Saudis condemning the use of chemical weapon by Saddam, killing 100,000 or injuring 100,000. In Syria, he mentioned 40, 50, 100. Yes, this was a disaster. Bad. Everybody should confirm. But we have our own experience, about 100,000 people. And the missile, everybody is talking about missile. This is Iranian experience. They have been targeted by thousands of missiles during war. And everyone knows who supported Saddam to use missiles against Iran. Abdelaziz said 100 Yemeni missiles. It is not Iranian missile, this is Yemeni missile. But 1,800 missiles were used against only one city this full during the war. 1,800 missiles against one city. You can imagine the other numbers. Iranians, they have been continuously for 40 years faced with economic war led by the US, political war led by the US, cyber war led by the US. Abdelaziz said they have tried very many times. Iranians, they have not really cooperated. But let's be a little bit more open and sincere today together, because we are not going to deceive each other. During the 8 years war, Saudi, GCC, they supported Saddam invasion of Iran. When you read the WikiLeaks, you see during President Bush, always the Saudis, Emiratis, they have been pushing the US to attack Iran.
Hossein, you have a minute, so I'm going to ask you to jump this to 2018. And the extent to which you think we are headed to a new war.
Because we want to agree on the basis Abdel Aziz proposed. You know, it is very good basis. And you remember during Obama also, Secretary of State John Kerry said every meeting we had with Saudis, Emiratis, Egyptians, they were asking us to attack Iran. This is how they have approached Iran. This is the Iranian perception of threat. I need to explain how Iranians in 40 years, their mindset has been formed about the real threats they have been facing.
And however, in the current context, do you see a way out of that?
Yeah, and the current. The threats now are accelerated because now we have Saudis allying with Israel to fight Iran. This is completely unprecedented. Now we have quadrilateral cooperation between Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the US to bring a regime change in Iran. It is public. This is American papers. They have written about the many meetings in Washington about these four countries. Now we have huge influence of Prime Minister Netanyahu and White House. Now we have John Bolton there. I mean, these are the new practically accelerating the threats against Iran. However, about terrorism is really a new phenomenon in the region. We have always had terrorism. Abdel Aziz mentioned about Hezbollah, but I wish he could respect the Lebanese election as international order. When Lebanese people, they voted for Hezbollah, they have in parliament seats. This is international order. You should respect the vote of people. You are calling a terrorist, Hezbollah a terrorist group when they got a Lebanese vote. But everyone knows the root causes of ISIS and who is supporting, who is funding. I don't need to say. You all know. I don't need to say.
So I'm going to cut you there then, and I'm going to bring it back. I wanted to get everyone to have an initial comment so that we can open up a conversation. So, Bassma, Syria has tragically been the kind of theatre for these regional rivalries, so devastating over the last 5 years, 7 years now. How do you see it? Are we heading towards further polarization? And given that you have one foot in Europe, of course, how should the Europeans respond?
Thank you. Thank you to ECFR for this panel, which in fact reminds me of another panel which we had about 3 years ago. Ambassador Mousavian was sitting, in the place where Ambassador Aziz is sitting was Prince Turki bin Aziz, bin Faisal, son. And I expressed the wish that Iran and Saudi Arabia would reach some form of cooperation in order for Syria to return to some form of peace. Obviously, things have not taken this direction. In Syria at the moment, the uprooting of populations systematically from different regions has led to the accumulation of a population of over 3 million in the northwest. Nobody knows what the fate of this population will be. Testimonies are that children are dying. And to give a less tragic note to this, the eastern Ghouta of Syria, which is this neighborhood about 7 kilometers from Damascus, which was a stronghold of the opposition for years and was under siege for 5 years, has stopped producing a very famous product. During the spring, the whole area would turn dark orange because it is the area that produces the paste of apricot for the whole country and for the region. This has now stopped. Very little production. These people have been uprooted, they are without jobs, they are thrown in that northwestern region of Idlib. Their fate is unknown. This is the reality of Syrians. Demographic change is happening at a pace that is accelerated now. It is a policy that is clearly implemented, and we are collecting facts, we have collected facts, and are documenting how this is happening with regime support and Iranian support. Not Russian support as far as we can tell, but definitely systematic with a pre-planned scheme of ethnic cleansing, to be honest. Do we call it ethnic, sectarian, political, however you want to call it? It is to displace, push out people who are not willing to live under Assad's rule without protest, those who protested, so punishment. And these people are expelled. The reality is that there is the illusion today that Assad has prevailed, that he will rule over a graveyard, but he will rule again this country with the support of his allies. And Iran believes that he has won, Russia believes he has won. But about 2 weeks ago, I think this military victory that Russia saw and Iran sees has turned into a very difficult conundrum for Russia. Because Russia has not actually achieved a military victory. What it has achieved is that it is responsible today for having brought Iran into Syrian territory and allowed it to take root militarily with the militias that it controls. And this has brought a response from Israel, which does not tolerate Iranian presence on Syrian territory. So if the United States and Europe and other countries are willing to live with Iran in Syria, we have a neighbor who doesn't want to live with Syria, with Iran present in a country at its border. It was looking to solve the issue in Lebanon. It now has the problem expanding into Syria. Now, this tells us that the polarization you've just described, Julien, may well turn into a major confrontation. If we can avoid this confrontation is really the big question. And I believe we are today in a situation where Russia can be told there is no other way out for Russia from this conundrum but to go for a political solution that sets a plan, a settlement plan, that schedules the withdrawal, peaceful withdrawal of all foreign forces from Syria. Our problem with Iranian presence in Syria today is one, that it attracts Israeli attacks, and second, that it is toxic for the jihadi groups. And that as long as we have this presence of foreign sectarian militias, we will continue to have the jihadi problem. Daesh will re-emerge, Al-Nusra will be there, and we will never get rid of any of these groups. So this combination of factors will continue indefinitely to be a source of explosions. Lebanon explodes every 10 years. Syria will explode probably more often than that. So the way out of this may well be the political plan, the negotiated withdrawal of these forces from Syria. And we continue to believe, in spite of Iran's rejection of any dialogue, and this has been attempted by the groups who are described as all terrorist, all radical, all jihadi Islamists, the democratic opposition has approached Iran, has asked for a dialogue, has engaged in conversations, and Iran has closed the door. And we have told our Iranian interlocutors, we remind you, you closed the door. We did not. We came to you, but you closed the door. So I may be seconding what Ambassador Aziz was saying, but this is Syrians trying to talk to those countries that have influence in Syria in order to resolve their issue. And we found nobody to talk to. I will leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Bassma. How much is there a sense in Paris that we are headed to a more dangerous situation? Is there any horizon for some more positive But also to add to that, as one zooms out a bit regionally, I mean, we focused a lot on Iran in this panel. France has obviously taken quite a tough line on some of the Iranian activities in the region. But Macron has also taken a stand against some of the Saudi positioning in the region. And obviously we saw that most defiantly when the Saudis effectively detained the Lebanese Prime Minister, threatened to bring down the government. President Macron went to Riyadh, played a role in getting him released. Clearly it's tricky when you're not just dealing with one problematic actor, but a series of actors who are all intent on pursuing destabilizing policies as they see that as a means of advancing their own possibilities and interests. So this backdrop, you have Trump, you have the collapse of the deal from the US perspective. What can France do in this mix? Macron is trying to be an activist, it seems. Is there space for Europeans to help save this before it gets even worse?
Thank you, Julien. First of all, thanks for the invitation. So I'm a policy planner, so I'm not beholden to the diplomatic language, and I hope you'll take my frankness as a sign of that. So first of all, I think Europeans need to have a clear-eyed view of what's going on. It's not about any type of essential Sunni-Shia difference or Persian-Arab difference. I think what we have, even though passions and identities can be manipulated and used to that effect, but at the bottom, I think we have a pretty modern conflict based on nationalism on both sides and where history plays a big role. And in this respect, I agree that the 1980s was a defining moment, and Iran being attacked by Iraq, and Iraq being supported by most of our countries is a defining moment. So you can understand the willingness to make sure that their safety is ensured, and that, for example, they have missiles that during the 1990s they received in such great quantity. However, obviously, the constant meddling throughout the region, the opening of new fronts, the support given to militias go, I think, way beyond that type of reassurance that they would be that it would be in their right to seek, way beyond a desire for protection, and I think contribute to the destabilization of the region. So that's the premise. So the first thing is we need to have a clear-eyed view of the problem we have. A second thing is, I think as Europeans we need to keep a clear positioning on the various issues. So I was in Tehran 2 months ago. I had the privilege of helping prepare Minister Le Drian's visit to Tehran in early March. So I was there in February, 3 months ago actually. And so my line was, obviously we have a Trump problem, but we do have an Iran problem. And that's the basis I think we should operate from. And I think the former should not distract us from the latter. And I think if we want a sovereign Europe and a Europe that affirms its independence, we can deal with both problems at the same time and be as resolute on the first issue of JCPOA that we want to uphold as on the second one. The third thing is, I think as Europeans we need to clearly see that, because that was part of your question, war is indeed possible, and indeed it has become much more likely than before. And if it has not started yet, with Israel striking Iranian positions inside Syria, which of course brings the question of whether some kind of deterrence has been established or not. But if the strikes continue, it means that there's an ongoing a balance of power that has not been established, and so an attempt at establishing that balance of power. Then the question is, where is that leading us? And I will make two brief remarks on this respect. The first thing is, I think the Israelis underestimated, by having a sort of benign neglect attitude vis-à-vis Bashar al-Assad hold on power. I think they underestimated the danger for them that the strengthening of Assad was representing, and so they have been reacting in the past 6 months or year, but that might be there actually might be more to come, and that's what we're fearing. Second thing is that I think there's a discrepancy between, on the one hand, the assessment made by the, let's say, the military establishment in the US and in Israel, saying that we need to push back on Iran, in Syria in particular, but let's keep JCPOA in place. That was the position. So discrepancy between that position and the position taken by Trump, Netanyahu, and Mohammed bin Salman, in the sense that I think Prime Minister Netanyahu sees his interest in pushing that much further, using the window of opportunity that Trump offers, and putting itself, I think, in a sort of tension with his, most of its advisors, especially on the Pentagon side. And so, because of that discrepancy and because of that danger, I think Europeans have to double down their efforts at finding a political solution. That would be my conclusion for Syria, but also for Iran, Saudi Arabia. I think what we should do is still strive for that political solution in Syria. Second, we should keep JCPOA in place because we fought very hard for it, and the French know that. I've been trying to strengthen the deal. We do think it's not a perfect deal, but it's a good one, and so we should keep it pacta sunt servanda. And second, we should have a more for more strategy in which if Iran is ready to seriously address the problems that we have with its policies, especially in terms of missile proliferation, more than missile for itself, but missile proliferation in terms of regional meddling, then we can do more than just serving the pact of JCPOA and go further. And I think that's the way we'll regain a dose of sovereignty.
Just thank you very much. We have time for 2 or 3 questions. I'm afraid that's all we can bear with because we have to get to the buses for dinner. So if you could raise your hands if you would like to make any statements. I think there are a couple of comments over there, so I'll take those 2 people sitting next to each other.
Thanks for a great panel. I guess I have a question to Mr. Mousavian.
Could you introduce yourself?
Sorry, Patricia Sassan from the Polish Institute of International Affairs. I'm a new member of the Council, so really thrilled to be here and be able to listen to you. My question is to Mr. Mousavian about Iranian troops in Syria. What are the conditions under which those troops would go back to Iran? Or what is the official position of Iran about the troops helping Bashar al-Assad? As I understand, there is a very thin line to which Israel is able to accommodate Iranian presence in Syria, because it's been ongoing, it's not a new thing, it's just been strengthened. Just the line is that when Iran begins to, the presence is boosted beyond helping Bashar al-Assad, it just becomes too much for Israel. So what are the conditions for Iran to withdraw from Syria? I guess it's a simple question.
Shall I go straight?
Yes, please.
Eran Zion from Israel, former Deputy National Security Advisor, now representing only myself, also first time here, so thanks very much for inviting me and thanks for the panelists. Very quickly, because obviously from an Israeli perspective there's a lot to react to. First of all, I want to start with what I heard from the distinguished Iranian panelists, and I want to start by sympathizing. I appreciate the Iranian threat perception as you, sir, presented, and as I also had the privilege of hearing other multiple times. And from an Israeli perspective, I hope you can also appreciate the almost mirror image of an Israeli threat perception, brought about by long-standing Iranian activities, both direct and indirect, mostly indirect, through Hezbollah, through Islamic Jihad in Gaza, and so on and so forth. And in this day and age, and here maybe I'm voicing an opinion which might be a minority, but coming from the Middle East and looking for many years at the geostrategic landscape, I think now is a great opportunity for us given what is happening in the US, given what is happening in Europe, to realize that looking towards the external powers to solve our own problems in the region is probably not a good strategy. And I was, on the one hand, encouraged to hear that the Saudi, GCC, and Iran are engaging. It was also interesting to see the different accounts, obviously, of this engagement. But I think more engagement with Israel, directly, indirectly, whatever, is the way to go if we are to advance towards political solutions. If we want to maintain this kind of military skirmish, I would say, unfortunately, we're now on kind of a slippery slope, and this is the default. We will continue to exchange, potentially deteriorating further and further, escalating, and who knows how far it's going to go. I do believe that there is enough of a common denominator, as strange as it may sound to some people in the room, to come to some sort of an accommodation. And I want to throw it back to you and pick up the issue of the grand bargain, which of course involves the US. And again, I sympathize with your description, and I can attest to its veracity, because I was there also at the time. And I know that grand bargain proposals were made and were rejected also by Israel. I was in a minority view within our establishment who thought that it is a good idea to go for a grand bargain, but there were other good reasons to opt for a JCPOA first, or a nuclear issue first. So from your perspective, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on what a grand bargain would look like, not only vis-a-vis the US, but also vis-a-vis Israel. Lastly, to the Saudi gentleman, and again, I want to be very direct. If you were to listen to internal Israeli discussions these days, and also to some of the public discussions, you would hear that there is almost a perfect alignment between Saudi and Israeli interests. And while I don't want to argue with that, I do want to ask, to what extent, again, in this current condition, is the Israeli-Palestinian issue a factor from the Saudi perspective when you look at your overall strategic relations with Israel? And to put it simply, is there a way to advance the relations, also in an Iranian context, in a Saudi context, in whatever context, while understanding that the Israeli-Palestinian issue will not be resolvable in the foreseeable future, or is it a condition for any kind of real strategic cooperation between Israel and Saudi? Thank you.
Iran, thank you. I'm afraid, folks, we've got 1 minute each left. Such is the way of these things. We could be here for hours. I'm going to enforce it quite strictly. If you don't have a question, how can we make things better, will be the question I pose to you.
Should I respond to the two questions or not?
You have a minute. You can choose it.
For 1 minute to 2 questions?
You have a minute.
And my statements?
Just about 15
You're
seconds.
so nice with Iranians. Okay, about Iranian condition to pull out from Syria, there is really no condition and precondition. Iran has publicly said if the Syrian government, the minute they want Iran to leave, Iran would leave. And Iran would never once, and I don't believe Iranians ever would try to have military base in Syria. No other countries in the region also. This is not Iranian strategy. Second, on what Bassma said, I think there is Astana process, Bassma. Iran, Turkey, Russia, practically led by Russia, and democratic oppositions are participating, and if Iran decline, because there is already a trilateral framework, and practically Russia is leading, and Iran could not at the same time to this step. About Iran and Israel,
10 seconds.
2 questions
Go.
if you want.
Go. No, go, please.
But the question is to me.
Please, but it's going to have to be quick.
About Iran and Israel, I believe there are the same rhetorics. Every day Netanyahu threatens Iran, attacking Iran, dismantling Iran. Iranians also, they have the same rhetorics. The solution is, as Abdulaziz suggested, UN Charter. The United Nations can take steps to commit Iran and Israel to complete articles of UN Charter.
Abdulaziz, I'm going to give you the floor now.
Just regarding
Just 1 minute.
the question, I think it's a very good question. We offered the great bargain 15 years ago, which is the API, the Arab Peace Initiative. It was an initiative from Saudi Arabia, it was adopted by the Arab League, and that's still on the table. Full peace, full normalization, for full withdrawal to the 1967 borders. That still stands. I don't think any Saudi politician or any GCC politician will be able to do anything without commitment on the part of Israel to that bargain.
Thank you very much.
It'll be 30 seconds. If the position of Iran is to say that the Syrian government, a Syrian government, asks for Iran to withdraw, Iran will withdraw. If Iran recognizes the resolutions for the settlement of the Syrian issue, the latest being the 2254, which is the basis of the negotiation track currently in Geneva. I understand from what you say that we can go for a transitional government, and that if this transitional government asks for the departure of all the militias that Iran has organized in Syria, that's important, these are militias organized by Iran, it's not only the Revolutionary Guards that should be out. In this case, Iran will deliver. That is very good news to me.
Just now, final word? No? Okay. Thank you very much. I know we could really go on here, and I hope you will continue the conversation together and amongst others here.